about how big brands are using mobile and current trends in mobile. I understand that I have about 30 to 40 minutes and then we can do a Q&A after that. Just so you know you think fast, I talk fast, we'll get along great, let's do this. So first of all, right out of, while I was at University of Florida, I sort of helped support my my education and also provided extra beer money by a very interesting summer job through the summers when I was here, when I wasn't going to school. It turns out that when you grow up in Orlando, Florida, you're afforded all kinds of interesting professional opportunities. So just to be clear, I'm that one. Actually being a character performer at the Walt Disney Company is a super cool experience. Anybody here who's walked that path? Sweet! Awesome. Very cool.
Not in a suit. But
what's that?
I said not in a suit, but...
Awesome. Very cool. Well, the interesting thing about the Disney experience, it is very sort of, it's very cultish, and you go through not so much orientation as much as like cultural indoctrination. But part of that, there's actually a lot of really incredible insights, and a lot of the things that we think about as advertising professionals or digital experience designers, this concept of user experience, it turns out that Walt Disney pretty much had that figured out 50 years ago. And they have a whole language about how to describe user experience and guest experience, and they have a whole lexicon. One of the insights that you learn in the Traditions program is that when you, which is their orientation program, is that you're supposed to, even when you're in costume, you're supposed to smile for every picture. Because even though the guests can't see your face, the energy that you project kind of goes through the costume and out into the park. And that is very much true, and really beautiful metaphor, really, for professionalism in general. So anyways, I'm doing meet and greets as Pluto for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden one day I go back to the great room and I see this flyer on the wall: the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming to Disney. And I was like, oh dude, the opportunity to be a superhero and get paid for it, it's all, like, you sign me up. So I was all excited, and of course the Ninja Turtles are not Disney characters, but it turns out that that Disney licensed the Ninja Turtles during a brief period in the 90s. So I got all excited, and at that exact time I show up to the rehearsal room, I'm all ready to try out, and I push the doors open, and something is terribly wrong. It turns out that I probably should have read a little bit further down where it says very specifically, important, all applicants must have a black belt in one or more martial arts, preferably with a focus in weapons exhibition. And I took like one Aikido class at the Rights Union. You're like, I have no martial arts at all, right? And I walk in and it was like one of those scenes in a James Bond movie where people are on keys and like with weapons and they're like, oh, And so I was like, hi, I'm in sweats and a t-shirt. I'm like, hi, I'm Pluto, So I decide that if anyone in the right mind would have just like gracefully exited the room at that point. But at that point, I was too emotionally invested. I was like, I've got to be an Ninja Turtle. So what I did was I kind of stealthily worked my way to the back of the audition line, And I'm waiting in line, and most of the other people who were auditioning were not necessarily character performers, they were really more kind of professional martial artists. So I'm kind of waiting in line, and I'm watching them audition, and the audition process is trippy and surreal, where like they teach you a couple of martial arts moves and some hip-hop moves, and then you do this kind of performance to this little panel of 3 judges, sort of like a, American Idol, The Voice, Turtle Parallel Universe kind of weird thing. And then they basically put you in a set of chairs, whether it's the good chairs or the bad chairs. The bad chairs, they say, thank you for your time, and the good chairs, get to audition again until they get the number of turtles they need. So I'm watching very carefully which ones are going in the good chairs and the bad chairs, and it turns out that it wasn't necessarily those with impeccable martial arts technique, because the 3 judges weren't martial artists, they were entertainment professionals and entertainment managers at Disney. So I decide, from what I learned at Traditions about this importance of the expression on your face telegraphing through, that if I have a chance in hell of getting this job, that if these dudes are 10 out of 10 from the neck down, I gotta be 15 out of 10 from the neck up. So when it was my turn to audition, it was ridiculous. I was like, totally going crazy. And I came all the way up to these judges, right? And they had no idea what to do with me. They're like, this guy's technique is terrible, but clearly he embodies the spirit of, So there was sort of silence and chattering for a second, and I got the job. So this is me with my parents. But that whole experience was that sort of, I use that as a setup because, that insight about, there's so many kind of insights in there that you can telegraph into advertising and into industry in general, certainly into startup life, which is, number one, that this notion, it's actually a really beautiful metaphor, that when you're creating an ad experience or an app or anything in the digital realm, you're actually pouring your heart and soul into something and pouring your energy, and then it's almost like you're standing on the other side of the phone screen when your consumer experiences that, and they don't get to see your face and you don't get to see theirs, but they definitely can feel the love that went into that experience. It telegraphs through the phone into the environment. So that's a beautiful metaphor. But another one worth noting is just sort of fake it to make it. And I actually prefer that soundbite, fake it until you make it, because the fake it to make it actually mentions that on the journey to making it as a creative professional, actually faking it is on that waypoint. You have to be very, you always have to extend yourself a little bit beyond your skis in order to be successful. So your resume should always be just a little bit more impressive than you actually are. Certainly my bio is just a little bit more impressive than I actually am. You'll find that. But I think it's really an incredible sort of metaphor. So in the course of our brief time together today, I thought that I would kind of separate it out into 3 different chapters. So the first one is going to be generally about mobile engagement advertising. So my career, certainly at Zumobi, has been really focused on the brand side of advertising more than the performance side of advertising. Certainly those two are intertwined, but I tend to do more campaigns that are really more brand, experiential campaigns, content marketing, things like that. So that'll really be the center of my conversation. As a transition, I'm going to talk about content experiences. Of course, content marketing is all the rage in this 5 minutes. We're at this moment in time where major brands are actually recruiting editors-in-chief and publishers from major publishing companies to run a 24-hour newsroom inside the brand to produce a very high volume of content. Not just social media and YouTube channels, but long-form articles, really compelling creator videos of the team that designed the car, and just really incredible content. So really, in the Zumobi journey, we've really centered our practice specifically around this intersection between mobile and content marketing. We'll talk about our unique kind of approach to that, and would love your thoughts. And then the last thing is, I thought it'd be fun just to share some insights about the journey of a technology startup. Doing a venture-backed technology startup is tough, and there's a lot of wonderful things about the experience, and it's very enriching, and but there's also a lot of really great learnings, and so I always try to, in these types of talks, it's fun to talk about our successes, but it's also important, I think, to share some of our scar tissue and some of my learnings that have been hard but important, so that we can all sort of grow together. So let me dive into the first bucket, mobile engagement advertising. So how did I get into this wacky space? Well, first of all, when I left, after I graduated UF and I left Disney, I was working for a small technology tech training firm in Orlando. And I was recruited. It's weird because I was actually working on mobile computing. And again, I'm old, so it was 1995. I was working in mobile computing, which was way before sort of smartphones or superphones or phablets or tablet, any of that. It was really early. But I was actually teaching executives that it was very powerful to use these new class of instant-on solid-state devices, which at the time I had to actually gray market in from Japan. They had a whole series of these really cool electronic organizers. They didn't have integrated cellular telephony, but they were still sort of smart-ish devices. And so I did a whole technology series about how to use that technology, how that was going to be disruptive, and was going to really replace many other computing metaphors. So in that journey, Microsoft was spinning up their mobile investment, and I was recruited to Microsoft Research, which was at the time the largest computer science research lab in the world, to really imagine next generation user experiences for mobile devices. And I was responsible for worldwide academic research funding in the realm of mobile computing, augmented reality, wearable computing, other kind of categories. Again, very early days, and worked very closely with Bill Gates. It was an incredible journey. I traveled in all over the world, China and India and all over the US. It was just an awesome experience. But the result of that was that after I was there for about 6.5 years, and at the end of that tenure, I had invented this interaction method with these tiles where, rather than using these kind of lame static launch icons, I imagined that it would be cool if every icon was actually a living tile that had fresh information. And you could, by direct manipulation, drag around this zoom space and get served fresh content directly into your phone. Now at the time, candidly, this was 2004, again, long before iPhone and Android, Microsoft wasn't quite ready. And it's not Microsoft, they are who they are. I mean, rant about Microsoft, over beer or something stronger. But the reality is that it just wasn't, it wasn't authentic to who they were then. They weren't really ready to go into the consumer landscape until someone else really forged the way, and that's fine. They're unapologetic about that. That's just kind of who they are. And so something very interesting happened is I had invented a whole construct and actually prototyped it and patented it, and we built a platform around it. We got nominated for Best Paper at the big academic conference for user interfaces. That patent actually ended up being the cornerstone of the billion-dollar Apple-Samsung case. So it was really very important work, but at the time, Microsoft was so focused on competing with BlackBerry around enterprise email and messaging, which again, it was 2004, I get that. But my message to them was like, listen, you can't say you're not going to ship this at volume, but then also keep me from doing something dramatic with this work. So after a year of negotiation and a pint of blood loss, they actually packaged up my intellectual property and my team and spun us out into an independent entity in downtown Seattle that was funded by Bay Area, Silicon Valley kind of venture capital financing. And then Microsoft took an equity stake in exchange for, I basically bought my patent portfolio out of Microsoft to run that venture. And then of course, iPhone happened, and in fact, Microsoft eventually dusted off this research. And if you have a Windows Phone device or a Windows 8 device and you have this kind of tile-based interaction metaphor, that's basically the evolution of my work, but wrapped up in a really gorgeous visual language, which they kind of called Metro. So that was an interesting moment in time for me. We spun off. I had a small team. It was very exciting. We kind of recruited up to about 40, which is where we are now. And we originally had shipped a tile-based interaction method for both Windows Phone or Windows Mobile at the time, and also BlackBerry devices. Again, iPhone wasn't even a sort of glimmer in Steve Jobs' eye at the time. And so we had built this tile-based infrastructure, and the highest profile thing that we did was we did one of the first branded content experiences in mobile ever. We did the official app for the Beijing Olympics back in 2008, is it? And that was very exciting. It was actually sponsored by Lenovo. They had bloggers on the ground that were live blogging. And right when the Olympics happened, you might remember this, that was actually the month that the App Store opened. So we said, dude, there's this crazy new App Store. What if, we weren't hired even to build the iOS version. We were hired to build BlackBerry and the Windows versions and manage all the content ingestion and processing and the user experience and all that, which we did. But then it was one of these great moments where in the 11th hour, we're like, dude, the App Store will be open by the time this campaign is running. Let's just do it. Let's just build, the iPhone version, which we did. We actually kind of threw together the first ever branded content app in the App Store. The App Store had only been open for 2.5 weeks. And it was an interesting experiment, right? So now you have BlackBerry, massive installed user base. Windows Phone, or Windows Mobile, I'm sorry, which at the time had fairly, tens of millions of users as well. And we were thinking that, it'd be interesting to see if this brand new platform, iPhone, actually is successful in, gaining some traction. And you all know how the story ends, but the numbers were shocking. These two platforms got 1% of the audience, 2.5 weeks after the App Store opened even. So overnight, we realized, our investors realized, our board of directors realized that the entire mobile industry had completely changed literally overnight, and we basically scrapped our entire $12 million app platform and focused on this new realm of apps and advertising in iPhone. And the important insight there is that doing a startup, as much as we all love to think that, I got a cool idea and we'll get rich off that idea, almost never happens. In fact, even successful startups, that's not what happened. Adaptation is incredibly important. Being able to kind of read the market and be very responsive. It's important to identify investors that are open to change and open to reimagination. It's important to have kind of a management culture and a team that's comfortable with reinvention. So we went on to build some of the biggest apps in the App Store. So we initially focused primarily on publisher. We had a publishing platform where we had a very cool multi-tiered infrastructure. We'd ingest content from the cloud, and then we'd serve it up. So we did all of NBC's official apps, the first wave of them, NBC News, MSNBC, Meet the Press, Today Show, Motor Trend, TLC, a bunch of sports apps, Dwell Magazine, Xbox, others, very, very high volume apps. And this was a cool experience for us because this was real brute force engineering. Building an app is actually one of those things that, one of the things they say about doing a venture or doing entrepreneurism is you should always endeavor to find things that seem like they're hard but are actually easier. And I never quite got that. Everybody kind of thinks that apps are quite easy. It turns out apps are shockingly hard to build and maintain. At least these apps that have tens of millions of users at scale every day, served advertising, very detailed metrics tracking. Every one of these apps were, we invested many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in many cases with the signature apps, many millions of dollars into maintaining these apps over their lifetime. Apps are expensive and intensive. But it was an incredible experience, and we also did some, so this was the official app for NBC News, which won a ton of awards, including a Webby. Actually, one of the last pieces of real design that I actually am a graphic design professional, so the last thing that I did as a design professional before leading the engineering and design teams is this Peacock menu, which was really cool. They since have eliminated that menu. We don't run the app anymore, but it was really, had a very beautiful tactile feeling when you rolled over, pop, 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 and rolled around. And we initially kind of invented infrastructure to power this Peacock menu for filtering your news, and we presented it to the NBC News team. And it was a really interesting experience because the app team was like, oh, that's so cool, we gotta do that. What if the categories changed? So we had to build a whole framework for remote controlling the categories, and it was very, very intensive effort both on the design side and the engineering side. But then, when all is said and done, we were like at the finish line, they said, and this is a common experience in working with big brands, they said, now, you probably should get approval from NBC brand at 30 Rock in New York. And just so you know, there's basically an entire floor of 30 Rock that does nothing but approve the peacocks. Like, that's it. The peacock is so sacred. So I'm like, all right, I'll go to New York. So I went to New York and I kind of went through that process, and eventually, I lost another pint of blood, but I got them to approve the peacock menu, and it went on to win a bunch of awards. We also did a bunch of cool stuff with other major brands. So we did branded apps for Pepsi. This was one of the first location-based check-in apps to draw you to places where that were Pepsi Pour locations, and then you could get rewards in the form of music. We did a very cool app for REI, which is the outdoor retailer, that would give you live feeds from the mountains. We actually tracked 20,000 mountains worldwide. We'd inject that content in. You could say if it snowed more than a certain amount, your phone would vibrate. You could answer. You could go skiing. It was very, very cool. A very, very cool app experience. And then we did the first iPhone app for Xbox because of our Microsoft relationships. Microsoft, to their credit, was getting to a place where they realized that so much of the Xbox social audience used iPhones. They weren't using Microsoft's largely unsuccessful phone platform. So they said, you know what, we're open to the notion of doing an Xbox app. But actually, it was interesting. We co-branded it Zumobi and Microsoft because they were uncomfortable kind of being the publisher of an iPhone app at that time. So it was kind of cool. We did this joint venture. We did the iPhone app. And at the same time, we were approached by Mountain Dew. They wanted to do a branded app. They actually had really cool creative where they had these graffiti writers reimagine the packaging of the Mountain Dew bottles. And they wanted us to make an app, a branded app around those bottles. And this was back, in the kind of mid-2000s when branded apps were all the rage. And so we did something a little bit controversial where we said,